Welcome, everybody, to OTF's On Texas Baseball. I'm Blake Munroe, where I'm joined every time by CJ Vogel. And CJ, right when we were about to record this, the news popped, big news here, as Texas has flipped Texas A&M's Easton Autry out of Corsicana, first baseman, third baseman. This is a big-time get for the Longhorns.
Yeah, literally big time, Blake. How about 6'5", 225 as a corner infielder from the left side at the plate? I think suits better as a third baseman long term, but heck of an addition when you start looking at the makeup of this 2026 class for the Texas Longhorns here. Up to 8 commitments now, Blake, and a lot of them have come recently. Texas and Jim Schloss on quite the run when it comes to accumulating talent down the road for their 26 recruiting class.
Yeah, definitely. And if you were an ontexasfootball.com member, you learned last week that Texas is going to use every home football game to their recruiting advantage. They're going to be hosting kids every weekend. Last weekend, they hosted 6. Well, out of those 6, 3 of those committed yesterday. And then, of course, the one today in Autry. But let's go back to yesterday. And we'll start with probably my favorite out of all of them is Trent Maben, the outfielder out of North Carolina. He was a one-time Duke commit, and he's been on my radar for probably about 2 months now, CJ. I mean, him and I have talked. He definitely didn't hide his love for the Longhorns in those conversations, but that's a big-time get as well.
Yeah, first off, I mean, we've talked about it in football. We've talked about it in volleyball. Texas going out and adding people and recruits and prospects with, professional sport lineage. It's something that we've continued to see in football, obviously with Arch Manning kind of leading the way. You look at, O'Neal, Asia O'Neal on the volleyball court, a number of different sports right now. Texas is going out and adding athletes with athletic lineages, and this is just another one. Cameron Maben, probably a familiar name to a lot of folks that follow the MLB. He probably played for your favorite team. I think he bounced around to about 10 or 11 different franchises over his 15-year career. But Blake, quite the addition here. Of course, you see 6'2", 185 on the statistical sheet. He can roam the outfield. He's got that speed. Where would you kind of classify him in terms of his 5 tools? Has he got them all? What's he need to work on? Is there anything that stands out when you evaluate him as, Texas got themselves a good one in the outfield for the future here?
Yeah, so I like, number one, I like his speed. That pops off to me. He has a great arm, very powerful arm. But even at bat, to me, he kind of is the all-around guy. And last I looked, he didn't have a perfect game grade, which is kind of surprising to me. But to me, he's, right up there around the 9 range, CJ, out of that 10 scale, of course, 10 being the best. And you look at that bloodline, you think about who has been coaching him probably since T-Ball, a former MLB player. It's kind of hard to go wrong with that.
Yeah, I have to agree as well. He's been one of a handful, if you will, commits over the last few days. Let's get to Finn Waters, a little left-handed pitcher out of Tennessee, up to about 90 miles per hour from the left side. Blake, not the largest pitcher that Texas will recruit in this class, right around 6 foot, maybe 190, 195 pounds, but he can bring it. And if you go to his perfect game profile, you'll see that increase in velocity has been a constant, right, over the last few years. He was around 90 or 75 whenever he first started getting clocked by perfect game, now up to about 90, 91. Sits in that high 80, the low 90 range. More so than that, brings a nasty slider, good curveball. He can kind of dot up the strike zone, if you will. A strong addition. Anytime you can add a left-handed pitcher that's young and shows that developmental tools, you do so and you don't second guess yourself.
Exactly. And that brings us to our next pitcher, CJ, more of a local product for sure, James Jorgensen out of Dallas Jesuit. And I kind of got the inside info on this kid through my son's coach, actually. And, he works with him, but 95-mile-an-hour fastball, also can play the infield, perfect game grade of 10. Which, that means they consider him a pro prospect. I think the big question isn't his ability, it's if he's going to make it to campus here.
Yeah, that's the issue that Texas kind of comes into every now and then on the recruiting cycle. Of course, it's a desirable place to come play baseball at. And with that, some of those high-end prospects also have to juggle whether or not they want to go pro to start their professional careers immediately out of high school or go the college route. I know he's been committed for quite some time now. However, I do want to mention Murrieta, the catcher. Oh, boy, I got Brady Murrieta out of California, Blake. That's a kid that I'm very high on right now, 9.5 grade out of perfect game. Defensive catcher. And I think that was one of the issues, if you want to be quite picky with this Texas team from a year ago, is the defensive side from that catching position. Maybe not up to par with what you saw at the rest of the positions, especially in the infield. So a heck of a grab in 2026. And of course, you start looking a bit earlier down the line, 2025 in that class. Pretty solid ranking in the perfect game grades right now in that top 10 area. Also headlined by Casey Cunningham, the shortstop out of Central Texas as well.
Yeah, definitely. They're putting in the work. That's for sure. I will say I'll leave everybody with a little nugget when it comes to Texas recruiting is they're not done with those visitors, in my opinion. I'm still expecting one more, CJ. I wrote in my notes 2 more, but of course, that one just popped here as we were getting ready. So, but don't be surprised if you see another Texas commit. I think it'll be a few weeks from now. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is I said it earlier. Every weekend they're going to be bringing in guys. This weekend is no different. 7 this weekend is what they're going to be hosting, CJ, after 6 last weekend. And then on top of that, once that's all over, they're going to also host an official visitor next week. So it's definitely gearing up to be another big recruiting class for Schloss and the rest of those guys. There's no doubt about it.
No better time to do that than a home football game under the lights. We saw the spectacles. We saw all the extracurriculars last week against UTSA. Obviously, it turns out it worked pretty well with all of the commitments that kind of flooded in this week. I expect something similar to that next week as Texas continues to put on not just a football game, but a football spectacle and a university spectacle. And baseball won't be the only sport that hosts a lot of big-time recruits for this game this weekend. So be on the lookout for updates for all sports over at ontexasfootball.com as well.
That's right. Well, that leads me to the next thing that I want to talk about, CJ. And we've gone in depth on the 2024 recruiting class quite a bit. We've covered it over the last few months, broken a lot of commitments, that type of deal. But the final perfect game college recruiting class rankings came out yesterday. Texas at number 6. But here's what just pops off the charts immediately. Well, besides Georgia Tech at number 2, I'm still scratching my head at that one. But this is what pops off. 4 of the top 5 SEC teams, 7 of the top 10 SEC teams, and then 12 of the top 15. No, I'm sorry, 9 of the top 15 SEC teams.
That's remarkable. And also, you talk about how, just to kind of be a little petty here, you look at what A&M was able to hold on to in their class out of the portal, right? Well, at 20th in the SEC, do the math right there, but that's not close to top 5 that you want to be in when it comes to that recruiting class coming in this year. Luckily for Texas, number 6 and 5th in the SEC. That's kind of that area that you want to sit in right there, getting the top end talent on campus early to develop and kind of carry out their career long term inside the program.
Yeah. Now it is worth mentioning, CJ, and I'm going to bring this up here so we have it for reference, but a part of that recruiting class, it may have been even higher, but a lot of these guys signed. You look at their 3 first rounders, and I mean, one of them right there out of Austin Westlake and Theo Gillen, but Bryce Rayner out of Westlake in California. I mean, he was a big time recruit, a big time MLB prospect. He was signed by Detroit. Levi Sterling was another one. So those top 3 guys for them going in the MLB route, but still, I mean, you're left with guys like Drew Rerick, who we've talked about a ton on here, Bryce Navarre, Jason Flores, Carson Luna. I mean, there's still quite a few good names on this list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Drew Rerick's the one that stands out to me, up from the Dakotas, throwing 95 from the right side, big body pitcher right there that you can develop. Dylan Volantis, another one, drafted in the 19th round by the A's. he's getting on campus, Blake, and that's huge. That's one, again, I mentioned that's one of the issues you have when you recruit at Texas is how often do these kids actually make it to campus? Well, when they're drafted and still step foot on campus, that's huge because they see the vision, they see what they can develop into. And why would you not want to come pitch for the Arm Farm after what he was able to do at A&M? Now at Texas, you can expect a similar trajectory for that pitching staff. And more importantly, and I'll get into this a bit later, the bullpen.
Yeah, for sure. And Adrian Rodriguez, I'm a huge fan of his. I know he's down there at the bottom of this list, but at a Flower Mound, I mean, that kid is a heck of a ball player, but so many good names on that list. I just thought it was really interesting going back to those class rankings. However, Texas number 6 and just so much SEC power on there. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it truly is. And I mean, speaking of the SEC, Blake, we finally got to see some of the schedule that will be released for next spring. Of course, Texas gets to host A&M, and that's kind of the big moment there. You won't get to see the hostility towards Jim Schloss until 2026, but at the same time, I'm sure there will be plenty of maroon trying to get into Austin and Dishwell.
Oh, yeah.
I like this SEC schedule. When you look at it from its entirety here, there's no Tennessee, which maybe I don't know if you'd want to see Tennessee right away, but they were the best team over college baseball's last 3 or 4 years, perhaps. And I look at it: Kentucky, solid team; Florida, solid team. You start looking at teams that were recently in the College World Series. I like this schedule. It's going to test Texas, but also enough teams on this schedule, Blake, that allows Texas to be super competitive in the SEC when you kind of filter in the Auburns and some of the Missouris of the world right now. Texas will have their fair share of teams that they can beat up on while still being tested in the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think it really is favorable, in my opinion. You get LSU at home, A&M at home, like you said, Florida at home. I mean, going to Arkansas, no easy task whatsoever. Nope. But in Oklahoma, well, they'll be tough too. And I'm going to pull up Baseball America's way too early top 25, but they have LSU number 1, A&M number 5. I mean, you get both of those teams at home. That's huge.
Yeah, sign me up. Again, that's all I've been wanting to see is just week in, week out, meaningful baseball at the dish. And on top of that, Blake, I want to see some consistency this year from Texas. And we'll get into that because we'll get our first taste of what this Texas team will look like in 2025. Well, they're back on the practice field for the fall. And of course, Blake, I want to send it to you just for a couple practice updates. And what's the 1 or 2 things that you're looking forward to hearing about this team and areas of strength or concern at the moment that should be bigger headlines as we move closer and closer to the spring season?
So, yeah, I'll backtrack for a second. Conditioning actually had started. They finished conditioning this past week, and then practice did start this week. So the fall practice, I don't know if they're going to do the deal. I mean, we've seen it both ways at Texas, where they just kind of do an inter squad scrimmage over the course of a couple of days, and then we've also seen them bring in some smaller schools, JUCO schools, whatever, and play them during the fall as well. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but practice definitely has started. And honestly, CJ, I got my eyes on 2 things. And the first one is very easy. And it's probably the first, if you polled anybody that I think that knew about Texas baseball, they're going to say pitching. I want to see what the Arm Farm can do there. They brought in, some good portal prospects, some good recruits, plus what was already on campus. And so I'm really, more than anything, anxious to see him because I have done a ton of research on this guy, even before I knew he was going to, be donning the burnt orange. And to me, he is probably the brightest mind in college baseball at the moment. That's not a head coach, that's an assistant coach. And that's saying something because there is a lot of good assistant coaches out there. So I'm really anxious to see that. But the other thing that I'm kind of curious to see, and I don't think a lot of people will have this on the radar, is what happens with the middle infield, but more specifically when you get past that first string. Because I know depth there is a concern currently, especially at the shortstop position. So I'm curious to see how that shakes out, where certain players might or might not play. Because, a lot of people have certain players penciled into those to, shortstop, to second base, even to third. And it may not shake out the way a lot of people are anticipating. So I'm really curious to see what happens there, not only with the first string, but the depth behind them as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Is it Adrian Martinez that steps in and proves to be a piece that you can kind of float around in that infield right now? Of course, Texas going out and adding Ethan Mendoza to their
Yeah, that
lineup.
was
You
huge.
think you would have, a piece at second base for the future. Of course, I think I'm one of those guys, Blake, that has him penciled in at second base at the moment. But again, that's what this fall and early months of the spring will tell us about this roster. Of course, Jalen Flores coming back at shortstop. I think right now that, again, you can probably put that in pin as to who your middle infielder will be there. But beyond that, to your point, who does step up and become some of those reliable pieces? Do you see one of those guys filter into third base as well? To me, it's all about the bullpen. And I mentioned this, Texas under David Pierce, they normally had a pretty good Friday night guy. You look at Bryce Elder, you look at Nolan Kingham, you look at some of the guys that they were able to put in at that Friday night slot. They were solid. Even had Chase Sugar, right? They had guys that could go toe-to-toe with some of the league's best on Friday nights. Beyond that, that's where it came kind of hairy, right? And especially towards those midweek days and maybe some late Sunday games in certain series where your bullpen kind of gets dried out a little bit. You didn't see the arms stay with that consistent gas or that certain stuff that gave hitters issues. And that's where I really want to see it. And Texas went out and added a number of arms. We talked about it earlier. But the one I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing about out of the bullpen, Ruger Riojas out of UTSA, him and Connor McCreary out of South Carolina, the two arms there. They had great whip numbers, and they strike out more batters than they face innings pitched. So that's something that I'd take into account very heavily whenever I evaluate some of these pitchers from the D1, P4 level, if you will. Seeing what they're able to do early on in the burnt orange is going to be huge for the ultimate ceiling of this team in my eyes.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned him, but also Aiden Moffitt is the guy that I have heard from guys that work at the pro level every day that Moffitt is on their radar because of the power that he has. It's a matter of control. And again, you look at the arm farm, you think there's probably no better guy to harness all that and build, break it down, build it all back up, remold that clay than him. And so I'm really anxious to see what Moffitt does because, like I said, there's pro people that are talking about him already and saying, yeah, he's one that we're going to be watching because he has the tools. It's just, can he put it together? One other thing that I wanted to mention real quick, CJ, you talked about Ethan Mendoza. I thought it was really interesting. He came on Coffee and Football. I mean, it's been like 2, maybe 3 months ago, but he said, I'm going to be pushing for that shortstop spot. And like he had no problem coming out and he was like, I want that spot. Like I will be pushing for it. If it's not this year, then next year that's gonna be he exuded confidence when it came to knowing that he can play that and he wants to play that. So those are two guys that I really have my eye on.
That's good stuff. And of course, going back to Moffitt, if you can touch, upper 90s consistently, the minute you figure out how to spot up, life becomes a whole lot easier. And that's kind of the issue that we saw with Moffitt with a 177 whip a year ago. Also, we talked about Drew Rarick, another high velocity guy that Texas will be adding, a true freshman there. Can never hurt adding guys in the bullpen or starting rotation potentially that hit, 96, 97, 98 at the college level. Those will be the guys that I'm looking forward to having, solid instant impacts for this Texas team.
That's right, man. I tell you what, it's going to be a fun season. We're still a month away. It's kind of like that countdown to football. You're just waiting, sitting there twiddling your thumbs. But at least we have football to get us through to it. So I'm not going to complain in the slightest.
Won't be hearing anything from me. I'll just wait for my Cracker Jacks and popcorn and hot dogs to be coming around in the spring, Blake.
That's right. But hey, we got fall ball coming up soon, so it'll be all right. All right, CJ. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of On Texas Baseball. If you haven't already, be sure to head on over to ontexasfootball.com. It's not just football. We got everything. Jerry Hamilton's got you covered with the basketball. CJ and I are constantly with baseball updates. And then CJ, you, Bobby, Jerry, all y'all do a great job of football as well. So head on over there, check us out, join the message board, join in on the discussion if you haven't already, and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. We would appreciate your support. So for CJ Vogel, I'm Blake Munroe, and we'll see you next time.